What's the biggest plot twist you've seen in real life? In primary school, we had a World War I memorial lesson and we were asked if anyone had any relatives who fought at the time. My friend brought in a picture of his great-great-grandfather with his wife. A girl also brought in a picture of her great-great-grandfather with his wife. The teacher said they looked similar. She put them side by side and looked shocked. We gathered around and it was the same man who had kept his two wives a secret. Both had been married privately. They were cousins and didn't know. In little town I grew up in, we had these two car dealerships on opposite sides of town, one Chevy, one Ford. They were bitter rivals. Attack ads, rude talking salesmen, billboard wars, you name it. When the owner of the Chevy dealership died, it came out he'd also owned the Ford dealership by way of a shell company. No one saw that coming, including a lot of the higher-ups who worked at the dealerships. I graduated law, and got engaged to the girl I had been with through university. We both applied for the same graduate program and ended up working in the same office in Canberra. 3 months before our wedding I found out she was cheating on me with our mutual boss and I broke it off with her. Long story short, it got really ugly and the two of us ended up in a very bitter court case over property. Canberra is a pretty small city and the legal world is pretty small there too, and everywhere I went I bumped into my ex. It was beginning to seriously get me down to my nerves and I applied for an Australian government overseas development job in Tuvalu, a Pacific island with about 11,000 population. It's quite a prestigious job to get with only 2 positions offered for a 2-year contract on a rotating basis. I was successful in the application and moved to the island to start my posting. Only to discover that my ex was the other successful applicant. I spent the next 2 years sharing a tiny office on a tiny island with the person that I quite honestly hate more than any other in the world. Years ago, my company was slowly going under, so I was looking for other jobs. I got a job with another company and put in my 2 weeks with my manager. I told the manager I've been offered another job and I'm taking it and that I'm putting in my notice. The manager said, "Oh well, we hate to lose you. Do you mind me asking where you will be going?" I told him the company and the manager was surprised for a second and said he applied for the same position too. I had to let me know I was chosen and said, "Sorry you didn't get it." This was during my grandfather's funeral. He was always a fairly reserved and distant father as far as I understood. Would fit the stereotype of a northern dock worker who comes home expecting dinner to be in the table and then goes to the pub all evening via the bookies. Anyway, an unsurprising heart attack later and he died. We're a big, but close family, so we know everyone, including his friends. However, one guy turns up, about the same age as my dad and his siblings, who nobody knows. Long story short, turns out it was my grandfather's son. From another family. From another marriage. That went on for as long as his marriage to my grandmother. My grandfather had maintained 2 marriages over 40 years, having 7 children with my grandmother and just the one with this other woman. They knew about our family and kept away, and apparently my grandmother knew about them but kept quiet. Turns out he wasn't going to the pub every night. I knew a woman who was going through divorce proceedings with her husband. He was always argumentative and borderline abusive towards her, certainly always shouting and demeaning. Then, just as the divorce was entering its final stages, he suddenly died. His autopsy showed that he had a massive undiagnosed brain tumor which had been physically altering his personality. His wife felt all kinds of guilt afterwards and took it out on everyone she talked to. She lost a lot of friends in the process. The one guy I worked with was having a baby. He told me about his girlfriend. "Yeah, she's pretty big but she's amazing, she's the one for me." I didn't know him very well, but as he talked about the pregnancy and so forth and I gave him encouraging words and how his life was going to change so much, we bonded a bit. His baby was going to be born right before Christmas. He missed our work Christmas party because his baby was being born. We expect him to be gone for paternity leave, but he shows up a few days later. I feared the worst, that the baby had died. It turned out his girlfriend was lying about being pregnant to spend more time with him. I didn't think much of it at the time, but the fact that he brought up she was big for no reason must have meant she was so big you couldn't tell whether she was pregnant or not. She showed him someone else's ultrasounds, they talked about what they would name their baby, how they'd handle taking care of it, all that. I don't know what she thought was going to happen when 9 months passed and no baby. I guess it's good she came clean though, a more diabolical person would have faked a miscarriage or something. But that was seriously messed up. Shortly after the dude left, so I don't really know how he handled it. When I was 20, I dated a girl who told me she was pregnant after a few months. I flipped into man mode, wanting to do the right thing and take care of our kid. Quit my super chill job and took a seriously stressful one working with troubled teens because it paid more. After 3 months of working graveyard saving money, she tells me, "Lol, just kidding. Never have I wanted to hit someone more." 1991, I'm 19, just signed the lease for my first solo apartment, just got the first paycheck from my new job. I deposit the paycheck at an ATM, another first. I'd always gone into the bank to do it. 2 weeks later, I get my bank statement in the mail, and see with horror I have only $1.87 in my account. Way wrong, I should have at least $200, I've been very careful with my spending. I'm freaked, I came within $2 of bouncing my first rent check. I'm literally reaching for the phone to call the bank when the phone rings. It's the police, asking if my ATM card was stolen. I check my wallet and the card is missing. My job at a theater pub came with cash tips, so I didn't use the card often. I tell them I was going to call them anyway because I was missing $200 from my account. Well, we've got your card, and your $200, so come down to the police station, they tell me. I can't figure out how they have my card and the cash. Doesn't make sense. I drive down there. Detective says someone, let's call him Bob, pulled in to use an ATM and saw a man acting suspiciously while he was using it, moving back and forth as if trying to dodge the camera. Bob says the man then left the ATM, got into a car, and drove away at high speeds as if fleeing. Bob then went to the ATM and put his card in, which popped out. Bob then withdrew $200, and then another ATM card popped out, which was my card. Bob's card had popped out because the crook had left my card in the ATM before speeding away. Bob realized he had withdrawn the money from my account and not his, so he brought my card and the cash to the police and reported the attempted theft. The detective gives me the description of the crook. According to Bob, it was a man 5 feet 7 inches, brown hair, round gold-rimmed glasses. I say out loud, so, about my height, my color hair, and glasses like mine, before realizing Bob was describing me. I'd never deposited a check in an ATM before, so I was moving back and forth, following the instructions on the screen, filling out the envelope with my account number, punching the amount in, etc. I then forgot to take my card out and just left because I'm an idiot. I drove away at high speeds because I was 19 and that's how I drove everywhere. Worried the detective might be annoyed, I didn't tell him I was the crook, I just thanked him and left with the money I stole from myself. Somewhere in a box in my closet I still have the police report where I'm both the victim and the perp. A few years ago, I got invited to a friend's engagement party. They were throwing a huge bash because they were planning on a very small destination wedding. Later in the evening, my friend's fiancé takes the mic and starts thanking everyone for being there. Sorry, Jen will be out to thank you guys in a minute, she's just having a wardrobe malfunction. He goes on to tell the story about how they met, how they were best friends and decided to get engaged, and finished along the lines of, we wish you could all be there and that we could get married right now, so we're going to. Out walks Jen in her wedding dress. Engagement party turned into a surprise wedding. I used to call my tutor Mister for the first 8 months of tutoring just to find out she was a woman. I once had a job interview. It was very early in my career and I was trying to move 500 miles to a new place. I built prototypes and brought samples of my work. It was a 9-hour drive, but everyone seemed so enthusiastic that I figured it was a lock. I did not get the job. I found another job in the area and took it. 6 months later they called and asked me to interview for the job above the one I had applied for. I was given an offer on the spot and worked there almost a decade. In the first few months the people there told me the guy whose job I had, who would have been my boss if he hired me initially, had actually said the samples and work I did was beyond him and he didn't want an employee who knew more than him. Well, I guess he doesn't have that problem since they fired him and replaced him with me. My mom and a gal pal went to Mexico for break during college. They had a great time. While boarding the return flight her friend says, "Sorry, I'm staying," and runs off. My mom hears from her a few weeks later after not being able to contact her at all. This was the 70s, long distance calls and phones were scarce. Turns out her friend been sneaking off nights and banging the hotel gardener. She loved him and stayed in Mexico. That's all my mom knows. Hopefully they lived happily ever after. I was a Starbucks barista before the whole names on cups thing was big, or at least, it wasn't really practiced in my tiny store. There was this very cute guy who came in maybe 4 to 6 times a week. A little often, but nothing out of the ordinary. I flirted like mad. He flirted back. It was all great. Then he comes in with his fiancée. I was betrayed and treated him coldly from then on. A month later, 2 of him come in together and I find out that they are twins and I'd shot down any chance I had with the single one. I worked at a small company summer during college. 2 dudes that work there, Mike and John, are best friends since high school, and Mike is getting married to his high school sweetheart. 9 months after the wedding, the girl has a baby. And it looks nothing like Mike but a lot like John. And she reveals that she had cozy time with John on her wedding day before she actually got married. She divorces Mike, marries John the next day, and Mike and John are not friends anymore. To be clear, the divorce took some time, but as soon as the divorce was finalized, she and John went straight to the courthouse and had a civil wedding. And to be clear, Mike and John are not their real names. I have lost touch so I don't know of any further plot twists, but the last I saw them John was raising his child. One of my good friends in high school started hanging out with this guy from the other public high school in our city, and before long they were basically joined at the hip. She had a huge crush on him and was pretty sure he liked her too, but she'd never had a boyfriend before and was too shy to make the first move. One night they were hanging out and he told her he had something huge to confess: he liked men. They remained close friends. Then a few months later at a party, the guy introduced all of us to his younger by 1 year brother. The dude and his brother looked similar, had similar personalities and the exact same sense of humor. Fast forward 20 years, and my friend is happily married to the brother, her best friend is her brother-in-law, and he and his husband are godfathers to her kids. Sometimes the painful crush on the dude pays off. Not a very happy one. I'll make it as short as possible, posted about this before. I met my bio dad when I was 23. After a couple years he invited myself and my toddler son to come live with him as I was struggling financially. He wanted to put me in his will. His wife at the time suggested a paternity test to be sure. I get the mail in, swab your cheek one. 6 weeks later the results came back that he wasn't the dad. She kicked me out. I was homeless, dropped my son off with and explained everything, said give me 3 months to work and save so I could get an apartment again. Father of my son claimed abandonment without telling me and got full custody. Plot twist, 2 weeks after that, bio dad's wife flipped out and in her moment of crazy admitted her triumph of swabbing her own cheek and sending it under my name for the paternity test. We've since retested and he's my father. I was seeing a guy from Tinder for a couple of months but it fizzled out and we stopped talking. I was on Tinder again shortly after and matched with a girl, I'm bi, who told me to follow her on Insta. I noticed the Tinder guy also followed her so I asked how she knows him. She hits me with he was dating my best friend for ages but they broke up a couple weeks ago because he was banging some girl from Tinder.